Okay, good morning, everyone. We have a few people in the room so far, and we'll get started here in just a minute. Welcome to UUSF Forum. We have this speaking in every Sunday morning from September to June, and we're well into the season now. Now it's April, and because Earth Day occurs in April, we are honoring with the earth and nature with more talks focused on the environment. I am Jeff Peckrell. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Human Rights Working Group, which is the committee at the church here that produces Forum. And my co-chairs in the Human Rights Working Group are Dolores Perez Heilbrunn and Melvin Starks. Both of them are here today. We have a beautiful, beautiful breakfast. Thank you for that, Melvin. And just by way of other announcements, we won't have Forum for the next two Sundays, okay? There are a couple of other things going on at the church the next two Sundays. So after today, we have April 27th, and we have Restore the Delta on April 27th. That'll be our next forum. And then in May, we have a couple of interesting forums with speakers from within our own church community. So on May 11th, we have David Strachan. He's written a book called Memoir of a Reluctant Giant, and he'll be talking about his book, and it'll be available to purchase there as well. And then on the 18th of May, we have another church member, Mwangi Mukami, who is originally from Kenya, and he has a talk called The Path to True Empowerment. And it is about involving or lifting up marginalized communities, empowering them, and for what they can contribute to our lives. So that will be a very interesting talk. And we have a few more coming after that before we wrap up the season in June. Other announcements. Okay, so the way we do Q&A at the forum is we ask you to write your questions on the cards that you'll find on the tables and the chairs. And then when the talk wraps up, which is usually at around 15 minutes after 10, the questions will be asked here. And so we do it that way rather than passing the microphone around. Even though people won't be asking questions directly, we just ask that, keep it civil and light with your questions, be open and respectful. That's all we have in the way of announcements. I just want to also acknowledge the commitment and the effort that a lot of people in the church put in yesterday to the hands-off protest. There was a sign-making party, and a lot of people walked down to Civic Center together. I could not be there myself, but I really want to thank especially Dolores, who got a lot of people organized to do that important work. I think our pastor, Vanessa Southern, was there, and a lot of other people from the leadership of the church. So by all my understanding of the pictures were great. Okay, so at this time, David Heilbrunn will give the Ohlone land recognition.
We, the members of the First Unitarian Universalist Society of San Francisco, gratefully acknowledge that we are located on the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples who inhabited what is now San Francisco Peninsula. We recognize that we benefit from living and working here, and we affirm their sovereign rights as first people. That's sovereign rights as first people. The Greater Bay Area is also the ancestral territory of the Miwok, Yokuts, Patwin, and other tribes. As the original stewards of this land, the indigenous peoples understood the interconnectedness of all living things and maintained harmony with nature for millennia. We honor them now for their enduring commitment to our Mother Earth.
Good morning. My name is Larry Danos, and I'm here this morning to introduce our speaker from Forest Forever. So we usher in this Sunday in the environmental month with April, and so we have a forum on forests. Our California forests can be thousands of acres of green trees, excuse me, are home to a lot of wildlife like bears, deers, and squirrels, and the list goes on that we've seen so often. And there's something called the World Economic Forum that has put out a statement about why we should care about forests. So I thought I'd just share that with you. Uh, There's about 1.6 billion people that rely on forests for their livelihoods, good or bad or both, they do rely on forests for livelihoods. And forests are home to 80% of terrestrial forests. They play a vital role in combating climate change. And by managing them sustainably, they can aid future generations. So with that, I'd like to introduce Paul Hughes, who has many years of experience being on the side of sustainable management of California's forests. And there's more written about him on the flyers that we all received in the church, and I think there's some back on the table also. Anyway, with that, here's Paul Hughes from Forest Forever.
Okay, I think for fun, I'd like to do a little visual aid here. And I'm going to need 2 volunteers to come up. This is not putting you on the spot, believe me, this is simple stuff. Yeah, if you'll take the end of this string and go right back there toward the door, any direction doesn't matter. He's speaking to the mic. He's taking this string back to the door. Are you volunteering? Thanks. Keep going. You are. All right. Thank you. A little farther. Now, sir. All right. You can hang. Why don't you take this piece right here? Just grab that string. This is super simple, right? And walk back to him. Walk back to him with it. And now, if you'll come back, I'm sorry, I forgot your name, sir, but the first guy, come back to me. Come back to me with it. So we're going to make a loop here. That's what we're going to do. All right. And you can start thinking to yourself, what is this visual aid about? Okay. All right. Now, keep going back if you would. You might have to go back out all the way out into the hallway, which is perfectly fine. Oh, yeah, hang on to that. Keep going. You can't get good help these days. It's just, keep going. You'll have to go all the way into the hallway. Todd? It's Todd? Keep going all the way back. Bye. Believe me, there's a point to this. We're another just go. Keep going. I think you'll find, well, all right. Keep going. Keep going. Oh, more. Go.
You can't hear us anymore.
Keep going.
Keep going, Lance.
Keep.
Till it runs out.
Yes, till it runs
It's
out,
going to be a long time.
which is, well.
Keep going, Lance. Keep going. Would someone walk out there and tell Lance to keep walking and keep walking? Because he can't hear us. Phil, would you go out and tell Lance to keep walking?
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
We're waiting for this to get taught.
The end is near. Okay, now, what I need next, okay, stop. is two folks. Stop there, stay there, please. Don't come back. Stay about where you are. It's fine. Now, if I could have two folks come in to about the middle of this stretch of rope and take one of you each side. Stop, stop, stop. And pull it out to the sides. So yeah, that's it. So we get a kind of more like a circle. Let go of that if you would. And then I need someone to take the middle about where you're sitting and pull it out to the side. That'll mean you'll come back. Come back now. Come back now. Pull it out to the side, someone. Yeah, there you go. That's the idea. So you can see we're not going to get this the entire room, but now what we end up with is a circle, sort of. It doesn't have to be a very good circle. And there's a lot of rope in his hand, I see. So this room isn't even big enough for this entire perimeter. I don't want to kick that over. Might lift that up. Can anybody guess what this represents? Well, I'll give you a hint. This is about forests. This is represents something having to do with a very big tree. It is 113 feet circumference, and this is the largest ground perimeter of any tree in the world. And so imagine there's a tree, and he hasn't even got all the slack out of his piece of it, a tree that has this big a perimeter or circumference at the ground. And we're not talking about multiple trunks or anything like a banyan tree, which drops down roots from its branches and they come down and cover a full square block. But this is actually one solid tree trunk that covers this much area at the ground. And it's the largest in the world. It's the Boole giant, which is a giant sequoia in California. 113-foot ground perimeter, the world's largest. It's in the Converse Basin Grove in what is now the Giant Sequoia National Monument. You can drop the cord. We'll pick it up later. And the Converse Basin Grove, which is in Fresno County, before it was mostly cut down, there were about 60 trees left, was the largest giant sequoia grove in the world up until about 1910 when they finished logging there. Now 50, 60 trees are left. The Boole giant's the largest, and it's named after Frank Boole, who was the logging team foreman at the time and who designated that tree should be left. It's also, interestingly, one of the tallest trees in the world. It's the 6th tallest tree in the world, about 2,000 years old. And you can go see it today. I've walked around the base of it, so I can tell you it's very large. Just imagine how much carbon a tree that size has in it and stores in it from the atmosphere. So California forests are the focus of my organization's work, and the state of California has, a lot of folks don't realize some of the big superlatives of the forest biome right here. The giant sequoias, probably not surprising to you, are the world's most massive tree. There's no tree in the world which has individuals that are heavier. There are more massive living things. For example, the honey mushroom colony in Washington State is a bigger organism. It's one large subground entity that has fruiting bodies, mushrooms that come up above the surface. And there are others that are very large, very massive. But as far as trees, the giant sequoia is the most massive tree in the world. And it's only found in California natively. You can find giant sequoias in the British Isles and other places, but they've been transplanted from here. So the giant sequoia naturally occurs only in California. Another superlative is the world's oldest trees, and those are the Great Basin bristlecone pines, which have their range into Nevada and the Great Basin states. They're found in those other places, but the oldest individual in the world is in the White Mountain range of California. And the age of that tree, which is an undisclosed location, is about 5,000 years. Now, there are older plants that some would consider trees, but they are clones. So they're not individually genetically distinct trees or organisms. For example, the creosote bush or the aspen tree, those are clonal plants. So the oldest and the largest are the most massive, and then there's the tallest. Anybody know what that is? The tallest trees in the world? The redwoods, giant redwoods, the coast redwoods get up to about 382 feet in height. And those are found in California natively, but also extend a little bit into Oregon, their native range. So those are some of the superlatives that are found here. Another thing that is not well known as far as superlatives is California has more acres of naturally occurring forest than any state outside of Alaska. So we are really a very forested state, even though we have such massive deserts and large agricultural area in the Central Valley that doesn't really have any trees. So those superlatives sort of set the stage, and we've also got the country's largest population, and that means there are more folks interacting with and living among those forests and who end up caring about those forests and taking conservation action to protect them. They're also really at hand for being logged, close at hand, and to feed lumber into the urban areas and so forth, and for export. So Forest Forever's focus has been since 1989 to protect and preserve the forests of California, also to promote sustainable logging. So we've not been against all logging, just the most destructive forms of logging, in particular clearcutting. We want to see that ended. And now a new threat that's even greater than clearcutting, and I'll say a little more about that in a minute, is post-fire logging, which is clearcutting after the forest has been impacted by a fire. Those are the most destructive and have no place ecologically. But sustainable logging basically means take some, leave some. So you cut, in the case of Pacific Lumber, which is a company that ran more or less sustainably in the redwood region for about a century, they would typically take 70% and leave 30%, or vice versa, take 30 and leave 70% of forests in a given area. And that allowed the industry to sustain itself and maintain a steady job base, an output of redwood lumber. But they were taken over in a hostile takeover in the mid-1980s by a guy named Charles Hurwitz. Some of you may remember him. I'm seeing a couple of nods there. He was an arbitrageur who lives in Texas still, and he did a leverage buyout of Pacific Lumber Company and tripled the cut of the redwood trees there, completely threw sustainable logging of the redwoods aside. Why? In order to pay his debt that he had borrowed money, junk bonds from Ivan Boesky and other characters like that, Drexel Burnham Lambert, in order to pay for this buyout. And so to pay for it, he tripled the cut of the redwoods. And we were birthed at that point. In 1989, folks were rising up and put a ballot measure on the state ballot called Prop 130. It became popularly known as the Forests Forever Initiative. And we set up a committee to sponsor this ballot measure. And that gave birth to our organization, a 501c4 type nonprofit, which means that if you give to it, you cannot deduct those gifts from your taxes because it's doing lobbying. We're advocating for good forest bills and rules and against bad ones. And so that means no tax deductions for those gifts to our 501c4 nonprofit. But we also created a foundation, a 501c3 type organization in 1996 called Forests Forever Foundation. And you can donate tax deductibly to it because it does not do lobbying. So we're a pair of organizations. And we're not the only one. Sierra Club really pioneered the two pairs of organizations in a celebrated era of changes to the tax code in the 60s. David Brower had fought against damming the Grand Canyon. And the IRS came after Sierra Club, and they ended up creating this critter known as the 501c4 lobbying type nonprofit, and had a pair after that. Prop 130 came within about 2 percentage points of victory in 1990, even though it was outspent 6-1 and was the target of some of the most underhanded campaign tactics that had been used up to that point, the most cynical and false accusations and allegations in the campaign. But we resolved to keep on fighting for forests, forest protection, better logging practices. And our main focus, again, has been supporting good and opposing bad bills, ballot measures, and rules. Also, we have filed some lawsuits, both the ones that we were involved in, one federal, one state, and do publications and public education with our foundation. Our book, which is called Forests Forever, but it's not about us. It's about logging policy and about forest conservation, is in the back. If you're interested, we co-published that. So I wanted to, I've been asked to cover quite a range of topics, and I guess we have about 20 minutes. So let me touch on some of those topics that I was asked to address, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. The most important campaign issue right now in California, and that's what we're working on, is an effort to burn trees for electricity on an industrial scale. Now, the industrial scale is important to keep in mind. How are they wanting to do this? By grinding up trees and making wood pellets out of them and burning them to generate electricity. You burn the trees, you generate steam and turn turbines and generate electricity that way. On a small scale, it's been happening here for a while, but very small scale. Now there's an effort promoted by chiefly the Drax company in the UK, which wants to create 2 new major pellet manufacturing plants in California. There are no industrial scale pellet plants in California now. They wanted to start this new industry here. They've spun off a California advocacy nonprofit called Golden State Natural Resources Association to boost this project idea. And what they would then do is produce 1 million tons a year of wood pellets, which are about the size of an M&M, but cylindrical. They're made out of wood chips. And then they would be producing 1 million tons a year of these wood pellets, transporting them from their 2 manufacturing plants down to the port of Stockton, which is a deep water seaport, putting them in cargo ships and shipping them overseas. We aim to stop this project. And why would Drax be doing this? Well, it's running the biggest power plant in the UK, in Yorkshire, and that has been burning coal for many years. And coal is now frowned upon, rightfully. Fossil fuels, as you know, are generating more global warming greenhouse gases than any other source of emissions on the planet. We need to be getting off fossil fuels as fast as we can. So the EU has come up with some targets and is providing incentives to get off coal and other fossil fuels. Unfortunately, though, they've taken a wrong turn and they're incentivizing the use of wood pellet burning to get off fossil fuels. Now, this might astound you, but it is true. Per unit of electricity generated, burning wood pellets generates more carbon dioxide, more global warming gases than coal does. And when you think about it, it makes sense. You have to burn a lot more wood to generate a kilowatt than you do coal. You have to burn a lot less coal than wood to generate the same unit of electricity because the energy concentration or density in coal is so much greater. Now, we're not advocating going back to coal, but grinding up our forests has many detriments other than just heating up the atmosphere quicker. You're taking away a big carbon absorbing resource, which coal is not, and you're destroying habitat, and you're destroying forests' ability to absorb, store, and clean water, and to provide a major recreational boost to the economy, which is recreation and tourism. In fact, recreation and tourism are the two biggest drivers of the California economy. And so it makes no sense economically or ecologically to be cutting down forests for wood pellets. Now, what the industry is telling people is a lie, and that is that they're just using scraps. They're using tops, limbs, wood waste from the logging process in the forest, as well as scraps in the mill. So think of ends that are sawed off in the mill, or pieces that aren't used and aren't turned into lumber. That is not true. They may be using a little bit of that, but overwhelmingly they are preferentially using whole trees, what we call round wood, to make these pellets, because they make standard solid pellets of a given quality. And so don't believe it if anybody says, oh, well, we're just using wood waste to make these pellets. That is not true. It's been documented by the BBC and by investigative journalists on camera, showing that they're harvesting whole trees. Another thing you can do is simply fly over with Google Earth some of the yards where they're keeping their fuel stock that gets ground up and put into the pellet mills. And those are big log yards. They have trees that have diameters anywhere from a few inches up to 30, 40-inch trees sitting in those yards. So it's a big threat to our forests, because if they get these pellet plants going here, this industry gets a foothold here. The purported reason of reducing wildfire danger, so we need to cut down more trees to reduce fuels, provides an incentive in the minds of a lot of politicians and in less informed members of the public to use forests as a fuel stock source for this. We get an industry started, it's awfully hard to stop it once you get it going. So we want to stop it before it gets going. Two plants, one was going to be in Lassen County, and another would be in Tuolumne County. And they would both truck or train their pellets down to the port of Stockton and ship them out. This would cause tremendous damage locally in the forests because logging, especially whole trees and big trees, is a bad idea now. It's not necessary to do it. Sustainable logging is not going to produce enough fuel stock for this. It's a dirty energy source anyway, so there's no good reason to create this forest destroying industry in California. And we have a few flyers on the back table about that if you're interested in getting more information. So I wanted to just touch on a few of the other things that I have some notes about. If you want to think about them before the Q&A. One is burning versus clear cutting. Generally, we support the idea of controlled burns. Controlled burning is when you go in when the weather is right and you carefully burn undergrowth and you burn fine fuels in the forest. It has a number of ecological benefits, and it's been going on, although on a much smaller scale before European colonization, for thousands of years. It's not a panacea preventing wildfire because you can't predict where the wildfire is going to start, for one thing. So if you go in and burn an area, or if you're doing what we don't advocate, which is industrial thinning to reduce fuels, you're not really doing much good to prevent wildfire as a whole, because wildfires start wherever nature determines they're going to, or where a cigarette butt gets thrown down and there's a human ignition source. Areas that have been treated for wildfire prevention to reduce fuels may not, and usually don't at all, coincide with where that ignition begins or when it begins. And so most of the industrial thinning that's going on really doesn't do any good. And the thinning that is going on, what's called thinning, you'll see a lot of it in the press, is mostly disguised logging. It's logging in disguise. It's mostly not removing fine flammable fuels, but is removing disproportionate number of large trees in the operation in order to pay for the operation, because the timber companies that do the thinning are paying for it themselves mostly. And those trees, those larger trees, are less flammable. They are not likely to burn. It's the fine fuels that are more likely to burn. Big trees generally are retard fire. If any of you are ever in Scouts, you know that if you want to start a campfire, you don't drag a big log in to start the campfire. It's not going to burn. It's going to smoke a long time because it's full of water, and it's not going to catch. What you need is fine material to get your campfire started. So the focus being overwhelmingly on fuels is the wrong focus. And increasingly, science is showing that that when you do this kind of industrial thinning, what you are doing is drying out the forest. You're removing the least flammable trees from the forest stands, the big ones, and you're creating more area for sunlight, more sunlight hitting the forest floor, which generates flashy fuels like grasses and weeds. They come up, and when they die and dry out, they're much more flammable than small trees. And you create greater wind speeds, which have a drying effect, more sunlight coming down through an opened up canopy and the rest. So when you do this industrial scale thinning, which is mostly what's being done in the name of thinning, you dry out the forest and you heat up the microclimate, both of which things are conducive to wildfire. So what we should be doing is preferentially not doing that kind of thinning. And yes, burning is fine, but mostly what we should be focused on is not doing these things in the forest that I'm describing. To prevent damage from wildfire, we should be hardening our homes and communities. That's where our resources should be going, preferentially, overwhelmingly. And they are not. A small portion of the money that you read about in the press that is allocated toward wildfire prevention is going toward this forest activity, which is counterproductive for the most part. Where our dollars and resources and personnel should be going is hardening homes and communities. Now, what do I mean by that? The most flammable element in the forest area, which causes the most loss of life and property, are homes. They are what's most likely to burn. and we can prevent them burning, not 100%, but we can greatly reduce the number of homes that are burning by hardening them, meaning clearing space around them so that flammable things like wood piles and dry bushes and grasses and fine porch woods and so forth, even broom handles leaning against the house, are removed from an area about 30 feet out from the house. And then about 70 more feet out from the house, you can do a certain amount of thinning so that you remove lower limbs and a certain amount of the grasses and so forth that could catch if they're not being irrigated. So about 100 feet out from the house, you do these home hardening activities, which will knock down the fire coming into that perimeter. But even more important than that is hardening the home itself. Most homes are ignited by embers flying in from the nearby fire. So what you should do, is install ember-proof vents on your attic to keep the embers from flying in and igniting contents in the attic, and making sure that your car windows are closed so embers don't fly into the car and ignite the car. And there are many other things that you can do to harden your home. All of this is available on the web. If you'd like more information, I can get that to you. But if we harden our homes, and also doing things like installing, re-roofing your house with inflammable roof tiles. Tile roofs are not going to catch, but wood shakes used for roof tiling, roofing, are going to be very flammable. So another thing is cleaning out your gutters. Keeping the gutters clean prevents embers from landing in gutter contents and starting the house on fire. We should be putting our resources into home hardening and community hardening, not into activities in the forest, which generally promote wildfire, destroy forest values, and cost us a lot of money, destroy soils and economic values such as recreation and tourism. Why is clearcutting bad? Clearcutting removes all the trees from the site and takes them to the mill. Now, there's no natural process that does that. You don't have wildfires actually removing the material from the site and taking it off site. Clearcutting defeats the idea of recycling forest nutrients back into the soil. And when those trees die, which is a natural part of forest ecosystems, dead trees, standing dead trees provide structure for wildlife habitat. Critters that make holes in those trees create apartment complexes, room for beetles and bugs to get in there, which are a food source at the base of the food chain, and then are continually reused as dwellings for birds and mammals and so forth. Standing dead trees or snags are important. When they fall down, they soak up a lot of water, and they also provide many dams that check erosion from flowing down a slope. And so fallen logs on the forest floor and in streams are extremely important to forest ecosystems too. But clearcutting not only removes those important structures and takes nutrients out of the ecosystem, but also destroys or damages soils by compacting those soils with heavy equipment that increases erosion, siltation in streams, and so forth. So clearcutting is a bad idea and absolutely unnecessary, because in lieu, we can get all the lumber we need with sustainable logging, as I mentioned. Take some, leave some. Post-fire logging is even worse because it not only removes the trees from the site, it also impacts an ecosystem that's recovering from a fire. So it adds insult to injury. Post-fire logging is worse than clear cutting. And it's being done now with the idea that removing dead wood from forests removes fuel, which is going to burn. But that is not true because, as I mentioned, dead trees very rapidly after they die begin to absorb water, and the flammable volatile oils in them dissipate, and the fine fuels, leaves, bark, and so forth, go away very quickly after the tree dies. So you don't have fire danger with trees that are dead, and they should be left in place to provide all those services that I mentioned. Recycling the nutrients, providing habitat for species, and the forests will recover much more quickly, and this has been well documented. If they're left alone after a fire, they'll recover a lot more quickly.
Right. Paul, you spoke about sustainable forestry as something that your organization advocates, and since it's not clear cutting, I think it means taking trees more selectively.
Right.
What's the difference between that and thinning, which you say is a bad thing?
With sustainable logging, you identify middle-sized trees. Generally, don't cut down the old growth, because old growth is almost gone. It's uniquely valuable. It has special qualities that no other kinds of trees or forests or stands have. So leave the old growth alone and just take middle-sized trees. Now, any logging is going to increase wildfire danger. So what we're talking about here is the logging that has to happen is better. It's going to cause less wildfire danger and less impact on forests if it's done sustainably, but it's not going to be the same as if you left the forest alone. So it's the better of alternatives. Take some, leave some, take mostly middle-sized trees, don't take the old growth, and don't impact the regeneration, meaning leave a lot of young trees that can come back. And if you do that and you do it in areas where the slopes are not over steep, so they're going to erode quickly, so more gentle terrain, you stay away from stream corridors, because those stream buffers that are no-cut zones are going to help prevent siltation and pollution of the water by soil particles. And you do some careful zoning like that, you're going to much reduce the impacts of the logging you're doing.
Okay, so thinning means taking old growth trees just every fourth tree or something like that. Is that why it's different than sustainable forestry and why it's bad?
They're taking indiscriminately taking trees without regard to whether they're old growth. They're preferentially taking larger trees, and they're destroying soils in ways that sustainable logging is not going to do as much of, because there's not attention to protecting the soil. There's more road building that goes on in thinning projects, and it's generally less inspected and regulated too than sustainable logging operations of the kind we advocate.
Thank you for explaining the difference. We read in the paper just this past week that the Trump administration has announced for California that they want to vastly increase the amount of logging on federal lands and in national, I think it's a national forests. Right. So should we assume that that means clear cutting, or would they be doing any selective logging?
They'd be doing a mix of all those kinds of logging, including the kinds that we think are the worst. They'd be doing a lot of some selective, but also a lot of post-fire and clear cutting. So that's not a good idea. Now, the national forests are huge areas in the US. There are 155 national forests. Most of them are in the West, most of those national forest acres. And the reason we have national forests is the boundaries of them were determined based on not just where the forests were when Teddy Roosevelt created the system, but also where the most sensitive forests were. And so the national forests tend to have the forests that are the most susceptible to human impacts: steeper slopes, and more fragile soils and the rest. The timber companies have the most resilient forest lands already locked up, where the soils are thickest, where the slopes are more gentle, where there's more rainfall. Those lands were the first to go, and the national forests were an effort to try to save what was left by the 1910s. And so national forests are more vulnerable. And what Trump is doing also is just arbitrarily saying we need to increase logging, which is a government involvement in the market. Now, we've had that all along, and it's generally a bad idea for the government to determine quotas for how much timber is produced on national forests. That's a political calculation. That is, Western senators have preferentially wanted to produce more logging in their districts because their logic is it creates more jobs. The problem is if you've got a political influence on the market like that, that is not supply and demand. That is a government mandated quota, and it's created a glut of timber on the market more often than not. So what Trump is doing is very much like that. He's demanding that we increase logging volume on the national forests, and it's going to increase the impacts that we see now, independent of market demand.
I didn't read in the article I read what they wanted to do with this lumber, whether it was for home building, lumber for that kind of thing, or whether it was for this Drax project that you talked about. Do you know what they want to use all this extra lumber for?
They probably haven't thought it through, but it would be used for all of the above. The Forest Service has a memorandum of understanding with Drax and the Golden State Natural Resources Organization that's its proxy here in the US, promoting these projects in California. And that mandate or a memorandum of understanding is to produce fuel stock for these pellet mills. So a great deal of the trees that Trump is mandating be cut down would be used for pellets.
Okay. Three more questions related to Drax. That's what you call
Yeah.
that initiative, right? So one
Right.
is what can we do to stop Drax? Another is what is the legislation to stop the wood pellet facilities? And thirdly, and this is my question, is like we know that Europe and England has a very robust climate movement. How is it that this thing is getting such a traction there? I mean, they're one of they started the
Right.
coal in the first place, but
Right.
they're also at the forefront of stopping coal. How can they be overlooking this
Yeah,
obvious contradiction that you explained
it's a
very
great
well?
question. I'll get to that. The federal legislation is sponsored by Cory Booker, directly addressing the fuel pellet industry. We like that bill. There are no state bills right now addressing this, and we're probably going to be generating some legislation in California very soon. But right now, what we're working on is raising public awareness and getting public officials on board with stopping Drax. The idea is brand new. The pellet industry has been in place in the US South for decades. It's been impacting local rural communities' health and quality of life for decades now in the US South. States like Mississippi, Georgia, Alabama have lots of these pellet mills, and they are exporting pellets. They're burning some locally for electricity, but they're exporting some to the UK. We don't want that getting going here. It hurts people's health and communities a great deal. So there is federal legislation, but as yet no state legislation. We're working on it. The big question you ask about how could it be that the EU has much better climate goals targets than the US? The answer is that it's one of these quirks where when alternative sustainable energy or alternative green sources of electricity generation were being formulated after the Paris Climate Accord. And to comply with the Paris Climate Accord of 2015, there were some mistakes made, some accounting errors, and the EU in haste, adopted an approach that viewed burning wood pellets for electricity as sustainable and green. Not only that, but they're subsidizing it, the transition to wood pellet burning to the tune of millions of dollars. But it's starting to change. Why did they adopt that? What would make them do that? They adopted the industry logic that if you burn trees and put all that carbon into the atmosphere, new tree growth will suck that carbon back out of the atmosphere. Hence, green energy, no net pollution. That's the essential logic that caused the EU to adopt this approach in error. The problem is that when you burn those trees up, you are not going to reabsorb that with new growth for many decades. And so there's what we call a carbon debt of net carbon emissions in the atmosphere for a long time that are never going to be pulled out. New growth doesn't absorb or store the carbon to the degree that old growth existing trees do. And they don't take into account in the EU the carbon costs of impacting generating trees and pellet fuels in the forest. Damage to soils emits carbon. And when you remove the trees that are sucking carbon out of the atmosphere, you're impacting climate change and how much carbon's in the atmosphere. They don't take the forest end impacts into account or the transportation costs. I think how much it's costing to transport finished wood pellets from the Americas, where they're getting most of their pellets, to the UK. All the ships, all the trucks, all the train fuel, those things are also not taken into account. The good news is the EU is starting to wise up and figure out the mistake they've made. And so countries that have been using these pellets, in particular the Netherlands, very recently announced that it was going to start knocking its subsidies down and getting out of the wood pellet business. And South Korea has done the same. They haven't eliminated their subsidies, but they are starting to turn the corner. So we're starting to get the word out, and many astute lawmakers, not to mention activists and NGOs in the UK, are starting to have inroads and make this change, this very great accounting error that's occurred.
Thank you. Redwoods. So considering what a tiny percent still exists from the original coverage, should there be any logging of redwoods at all at this point? And is it ethical to use redwood in building?
I would say it is ethical to use it if it's done sustainably. It's a tree that regenerates pretty quickly. What we should never be doing, again, though, is cutting down old growth. Now, by old growth, I'm primarily talking about trees that are in virgin stands that have never been entered by loggers. And you can imagine how few of those are. There are almost none outside of parks and preserves. They're almost all in existing parks and preserves, such as Redwood National Park. There are a few small stands of old growth outside of parks and preserves, so we should leave those alone. After all, if they're small, it's not going to impact the timber supply very much to leave them alone. And they're providing unique habitat values. Things exist and grow and flourish in old growth that aren't found in mature trees, forests and stands of 100, 150 years and so forth. But if you log sustainably in the redwood region, we can still bring back the redwood biome. But we need to be cutting less than we're growing back, for starters.
I wonder if there's any kind of sustainability certification for redwood trees that, it came from selectively harvested non-old growth forest. Do you think there is anything like that?
There is certification. Forest Stewardship Council, you may have heard of, does certification. So if you go into Home Depot, you can ask for FSC certified redwood lumber or any other type of wood that's FSC certified. it tends to mean it's a little bit better harvested, but I have to place a significant asterisk because FSC is a private company, not a nonprofit. It's susceptible to market pressures and political influences on its own board and internal governance that have been well documented. And it, unfortunately, those factors combined have reduced the brand's quality and value a great deal in recent years. So FSC certification isn't the end of the story, and there desperately needs to be a better certifier who's independent of the industry, who can provide real quality certification, because FSC has certified, for example, companies like Green Diamond in California that do clear cutting. So when I say it's the place to look, it's the best of a fairly sorry lot, but you can find FSC certified lumber, and that's a better way to go than non-certified.
Thank you. I think so far we've been talking primarily about pine trees, conifers. What about eucalyptus trees, which we hear so much are an invasive species?
Yeah.
What about maybe using those for this wood chipping initiative? Yeah, would that make sense?
I don't know what quality of chips they would make. I haven't heard anything yet to suggest the industry would prefer eucalyptus, but eucalyptus is an invasive species. It's not native to California, provides very little habitat and food value to California native species. And while it can provide some values, it's very flammable wood. So eucalyptus has those volatile oils that make it smell so nice, and they are very flammable. So generally speaking, we don't advocate that let me rephrase that. I would say that removal of eucalyptus to replace them with native species such as oak woodlands is far better for California ecosystems, habitat, and wildfire prevention than otherwise. But as far as pellet fuels, I'm not sure how they're regarded. Probably not as much as conifers.
Okay, back to conifers. What about cutting of pine trees for Christmas trees? Do you have a position or thought on whether that is better than artificial trees?
It's such a minor impact. It's essentially a farming practice, and it's not, impacting forest ecosystems any more than farming is, which farming has taken over a lot of forest ecosystems. But if people are going into a natural forest or a national forest to cut their Christmas trees, that's going to have some impact. They're generally going to be getting smaller stuff that's going to be regenerating the old growth, the older trees, but there's just not enough of it happening to be a significant impact.
Thank you. Have you heard of the Billion Trees Initiative? I work for a tech company that talks about this, and it's a way of making them carbon neutral, I think. I'm not sure if it's just a smoke and mirrors kind of game or whether there's anything valuable there possibly. I'm not sure if they're trying to plant those trees in California or whether it's more in the tropical rainforests. I'm not sure.
It's advocating planting trees.
Planting trees.
Yeah,
the Billion Trees Initiative. Yeah, they call it.
Yeah, planting trees can be really good if it's done right, but it should be done very carefully and very judiciously. Just planting tree farms, especially, for example, after a clear cut, you're increasing your wildfire risk because you're creating a row crop with even-aged canopy. It can be a canopy ankle high on up to 15 feet high, but it's an even canopy, meaning once the fire gets into the canopy, it races along at the same level and goes from canopy to canopy, killing all those trees. Tree farms are more flammable. They're monocultures too. They don't have the diversity that you need in a natural forest. So if you're planting trees, look out for planting trees that are from seed or seedlings that are locally sourced, because the genetic diversity is amazing. You can have, and you do have, differences in genetics from one slope to the next, let alone from one watershed or ecosystem to the next, one slope to the next. Genetic diversity is everywhere, and trees will do better if the trees that you're planting What you're planting will do better if it's sourced from local stock, that is, trees that have grown up in the area where you're planting the seedlings. They are adapted to that genetically, and they will do better. So look for diversity, look for local seed sources, and then lastly, take extraordinary care not to damage soils. So stay away from using vehicles all you can for access, and go in with hand crews.
So far, my efforts have been eliminating paper and wood consumer items. How do we eliminate the vast amount of wood being used in the building industry? What other materials can be used to build homes?
There are alternative materials. You've probably heard of steel, and there are kinds of steel that are a better alternative than wood in terms of carbon emissions. I'm not well versed on that, but I know that they're out there, and I can get you sources if you need more information. And there are other kinds of alternative building materials, such as using packed bales and corn cobs and so forth. But the best thing to do is to recycle the lumber that we're already using. You know, when a home is torn down, most of that lumber goes to the landfill, and it just rots and adds to the carbon in the atmosphere. So we should. It's more expensive to pull the nails out of existing lumber, cut the ends off, but that is cheaper than burning up the planet by heating up the atmosphere and destroying the carbon absorbing forests on it. So we should recycle the lumber we're already using. That would be the best suggestion we would advocate for.
Thank you. Someone from Zoom asked a question. I think you've already addressed it. What about tree planting and restoration? How should such efforts be prioritized? And finally, can it help prevent mudslides?
Tree planting and reforestation, as I mentioned, it can be done relatively well and relatively sensitively. It's getting better. I've seen in the 30 years that I've been with Forests Forever an improvement in the kind of planting that's been doing. For example, in the 90s, they were replanting after a clear cut, which they're required to do on private timberlands, but they weren't using locally sourced stock. They're doing that increasingly now, not as much as they should be. And there's still too much creating monocultures, tree plantations, which are flammable and so forth. So it can happen well. It's a good idea. The best thing to do to focus our efforts on, though, is proforestation, which means leaving forests alone wherever we can, and letting trees that are already big grow even bigger. That's the best thing we could be doing right now, is staying away from the oldest trees to the extent feasible. They save more carbon, they prevent more wildfire, and like I mentioned earlier, doing selective harvesting on a zoning kind of basis is the way to get lumber, best way to get timber.
Thank you. A question about forest rangers who protect the trees. Are they those employees being cut back under the Trump administration, and how do you see what the administration is doing affecting all the goals and initiatives that you're speaking about?
Forest employees who protect the trees. Park Service employees do that, but the laws on national parks generally protect those trees, as do the laws such as the Wilderness Act, which prevent mostly trees in wilderness areas from being impacted. Those are relatively low maintenance jobs in terms of, that is, there aren't Park Service employees generally going out and standing in the way of someone who wants to cut trees down in national parks or in wilderness areas. Now, there have been exceptions, I should mention, that have started in recent years. There's been some wrong-headed wildfire prevention logging in Yosemite National Park just a few years ago. I think that's been stopped with a lawsuit, which is yet to be completed. And there have been wildfire-related impacts to wilderness areas. Other than that, most Forest Service employees are not logging preventers. They're logging enablers. And so the mission of the Forest Service should be changed. That said, a lot of the federal employees that work in forests, be they Park Service, Forest Service, BLM, a lot of those folks are doing valuable work, interpretive work, trail maintenance, and making sure that the laws that exist now are at least enforced. Even if those laws are too weak, they're better than nothing. So it's generally a bad idea for our forests to have these kinds of indiscriminate massive layoffs that are happening right now in forest agencies.
What conservation groups are good to support that work in the courts to stop these bad companies? A couple of groups I like are Sempervirens Fund, Redwoods League, I believe they're called, and then the Rainforest Action Network, which I don't think they're working in California much, but
yeah, Rainforest Action mostly focuses on tropical rainforests, which is very important. But you mentioned Sempervirens, they're very good. As far as litigators, the big ones are the Natural Resources Defense Council, Center for Biological Diversity, and the Earth Justice Organization. Those
yes,
are great outfits and strong
are.
allies of ours. And by the way, our strongest allies on the Drax fight are the Natural Resources Defense Council, the Center for Biological Diversity, and Green America. And the first two I know do a lot of litigation, and I'm not sure about Green America, but they probably do some.
We have one more question on the Drax and the pellet burning.
Mm-hmm.
So what is Forest Forever's preferred method of electricity generation, if not wood pellets?
Solar and wind, and those are electricity generating industries that are far below their potential. Those have the capacity alone to provide all the electricity we need. Just look around at all the rooftops that could be fitted with solar panels. If you fly over with Google Earth, you can see most of the rooftops, even in relatively ecologically concerned areas like the Bay Area, are bare. They don't have any panels on them. We need to have a lot more solar and wind. Beyond that, people don't often think about it, but we have huge potential in conservation and efficiency. Conservation meaning doing the same amount of work with less energy, and efficiency being really referring to designing equipment, machines, and processes that inherently use less energy to do the same work without having to think about it. Energy and conservation are huge untapped resources. We're wasting energy right now, and that's actually an energy source we should be exploiting.
Thinking about the tragic fires in LA and Paradise and all these other places in California, do you have any thought about insurance companies pulling out of California and raising rates related to climate disaster exacerbated fires?
The LA fires generally were not caused by forests. The fires there were chaparral fires and not forest fires as a general rule. And I think even my qualifier is probably unnecessary. So we shouldn't think of forest policy as having been responsible at all for the Southern California fires. Now with Paradise, what happened there was largely due to all the thinning and logging that had occurred east of Paradise and had caused so much drying and so much wind acceleration east to west toward Paradise that made it very hard for folks to escape in time and greatly accelerated the movement of flame into Paradise. So it is misleading at best to suggest that there wasn't enough logging in the area. It's completely misleading to suggest there wasn't enough logging in the area, and it was fuels that caused that paradise debacle. It was a bowling alley effect created by having cleared the landscape through decades of logging and thinning projects east of Paradise that allowed winds to move those flames over to the town.
There's a sort of a meme that I keep reading about, which is that decades of forest mismanagement have led to overgrown forests that are ripe for super hot fires. How does that square with the what you just explained, which is that the thinning actually contributed to and exacerbated the fire there?
The timber industry is a master of Orwellian spin and language. They are absolutely using language very carefully in a marketing oriented way in order to move public opinion. And this is the message that is the one that I think is most taken hold. Forest mismanagement, and by that they mean there hasn't been enough logging and there are too many fuels. But as I mentioned, there is an overemphasis on fuels. Generally, forest vegetation slows down wind, creates more shade, traps more moisture, and defeats the drying and faster wind speeds that promote fire. The mismanagement that's been happening has been too much logging over the decades. That's the mismanagement that we would agree with that statement, but that's not the mismanagement they're referring to. They're characterizing an insufficient amount of logging as mismanagement.
Thank you. The tragic fires in the old growth forests and the sequoias that happened over the past few years. After those fires, I heard that some conservationists were opposed to reseeding. Does that make sense to you?
Not reseeding, it's not quite right. It's what happened after the sequoia fires. What happened is the sequoia fires, there are, I believe, hundreds or maybe in the thousands of individual sequoias killed in those fires. But the thing is that if fire suppression had not been occurring over many decades, that many trees would have already died. And so there was a lack of tree mortality that was natural and ecologically important. Trees living and trees dying are both part of the ecological process that are important. And so there was a burst of tree mortality after those fires that would have occurred earlier and in a more orderly, spread out way across the decades leading up to it. Then what happened is the Forest Service and other agencies, and unfortunately a few well-funded NGOs, came in to take projects to replant sequoias and to remove dead sequoias, which damages the soils and does not help regeneration. It hurts regeneration. Let me explain. Sequoias are highly fire dependent. They're little cones about that big, need fire to open them up and spray the seeds out. That's one of the ways they regenerate, is through the heating of the cones. It's a serotinous species. The fire reduces the duff layer so that it's thin, and the distance between the top of the soil and water underneath is reduced. So when a seed hits the top of that ash layer, it has a certain amount of energy to put down a rootlet and reach water. That distance is greatly reduced after fire, so the nutrients are made available and can be dissolved in water in a solution that's available to the plants as they regenerate. The seeds don't have as far to go to water. So fire is important in sequoia ecosystems for all those reasons. The regeneration efforts that have gone on have damaged soils with heavy equipment, dragging trees. Those soils also are much more dry and sensitive. The southern Sierras, where most of the sequoias are drier ecosystems with much more friable soils you can crush up in your hands like dry charcoal powder, as opposed to the moist soils that we have in the redwood ecosystem. So when you impact those soils, you do a lot more damage. And the efforts to regenerate the sequoias have failed, and they have been a very bad idea. I would add one more layer of information to that, which is areas where the sequoia ecosystem burned and were not subject to this intensive industrial kind of regeneration program abundantly have regenerated. And I can send anyone videos that you may like showing that sequoia seedlings this high, 6, 8 feet high, a few years after a fire in areas that were not touched after the fires did a lot better. And there's a lot more moisture down against the ground and habitat from the snags and everything else, more shade. Think of it as trellised shade, snags standing there breaking sunlight and causing a greater cooling effect, more moisture, less drying in the area. That's if you leave the sequoias alone after the fire, they'll do just fine.
Thank you. That is great to know. I'm just going to ask one more question because we need to wrap up at 1:45 and we're all a little bit past that. So if I didn't get to your question, please do stick around and ask Paul afterwards, please. So this is the last question. Is your organization through your 501c4 lobbying our congressional representatives, and how is that working?
We have in the past. We're not currently. We are going through a transition with our organizing efforts and are not focused on any federal campaigns currently, but mostly on this Drax campaign here in California. And when we have focused on federal issues, it's been productive. We've got some great representatives in Northern California. Some good forest champions, but my organization's focus in recent years has not been on the federal level as much.
Thank you, Paul.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Okay, just to wrap up, to say there won't be a forum next Sunday or the Sunday after that, but on the 27th of April, we'll be back with another environmental topic that our own Larry Danos helped us arrange. We're going to learn about the Delta and the efforts to divert lots and lots and lots of water from the Sacramento River to the Central Valley in Southern California. So very important topic. Come back and learn about that. And then in May, we have 2 speakers from our church that are going to speak. We'll have David Strachan speaking about a book that he wrote, Memoirs of a Reluctant Giant. And then we have Mwangi Mukemi, a member of the church, is going to talk about empowering certain communities, lifting up underrepresented in communities. That's what it's about. So come back 2 Sundays from now. Thank you.